Everyone saw the lap times today, but almost no one noticed what the FIA caught. While the cameras focused on long runs, tire data, and driver quotes, Red Bull may have quietly triggered the first technical controversy of 2026. Not over wings. Not over fuel flow. This time, it's the floor. According to multiple sources close to the inspection team, the FIA flagged something strange. A subtle, repeating movement under the RB22's floor, barely visible, but enough to raise a red flag. If true, this wouldn't be just a clever design. It would be the first potentially illegal aerodynamic trick of the season, one that might exploit a gray area the FIA never anticipated. And the most shocking part? This might not be a new trick. It might be something Red Bull planned months ago, and only now revealed in controlled conditions, hoping it would fly under the radar. But it didn't. And now, the entire paddock is waiting to see how far the FIA is willing to go. Because this floor might change everything. On paper, day 2 of testing looked like business as usual for Red Bull. They completed a clean program. Solid mileage. No major issues. And at first glance, their RB22 seemed like the same ultra-efficient machine that dominated last season. But that's exactly why the silence was suspicious. Red Bull didn't come to day 2 to test reliability. They came to hide in plain sight. The car looked stable, balanced, and surprisingly quick in long-run simulations. But when asked about updates or underfloor changes, the team brushed it off. "We're just validating data," said one spokesperson. No details. No mention of new materials. No technical breakdown. Just the same vague responses we've heard before. Meanwhile, the FIA quietly conducted underfloor inspections across multiple teams, a standard part of testing procedure. But something caught their attention when Red Bull returned from a mid-morning stint. It wasn't a broken part. It wasn't damage. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but enough to bring out the rulers, the flex tools, and the slow-motion playback. According to a source in the paddock, Red Bull's floor passed the static tests, barely. But only because the tests weren't designed to replicate real cornering loads. In motion, under high-speed compression, the floor's behavior told a different story. A story the official report didn't include. And that's the key. Because while Red Bull's PR team focused on tire degradation and fuel loads, the real question was being asked behind the scenes. Did Red Bull just show the FIA the most carefully disguised innovation of the new era? At first, it didn't look like much. Just a few laps. Some curb strikes. A couple of onboard replays. But to the FIA's tech observers, trained to spot microscopic rule bending, something didn't sit right. In several high-speed corners, the RB22's floor edge appeared to kiss the ground in a way that didn't match the declared ride height. Not violently. Not like bottoming out. It was smooth, almost controlled. As if the floor was intentionally lowering just enough to seal airflow, and then resetting instantly once the car stabilized. This wasn't an obvious flex. It wasn't the kind of movement you'd see in slow-motion TV replays. It was subtle. Engineered to happen below the threshold of detection, unless, of course, you were looking for it. That's when the FIA's suspicions deepened. Because during post-run checks, the scrutineers noticed a light scuffing pattern underneath the outer edge of the floor, one that suggested controlled contact at speed. Not a result of setup error. Not driver-induced. But rather, a repeating pattern that hinted at something more. A component designed to flex under aero load, and return to its original state the moment the pressure lifted. According to 2 independent engineers who reviewed the data. If what we're seeing is correct, it means the floor is behaving like a hinge, only not in a way the FIA has explicitly banned yet. That's the trick. It doesn't have to be illegal, if the rulebook never saw it coming. And Red Bull knows this. They've built careers on it. Officially, Red Bull has said nothing. No press release. No rebuttal. No comment on the floor. Just the usual boilerplate about gathering data and running through the program. And that's exactly what makes this so clever. Because unless the FIA explicitly accuses them of wrongdoing, Red Bull doesn't have to explain anything. They've built a reputation on operating in the gray, not breaking the rules, but interpreting them better than anyone else. If the floor passed static deflection tests, then in their eyes, it's legal. And unless the FIA rewrites the test, there's nothing more to say. Behind the scenes, insiders believe Red Bull has constructed the floor edge using layered composite materials with memory properties, materials that respond to pressure and heat, flexing just enough under load to influence aerodynamics, then returning to shape before scrutineering. If that's true, then it's not just a design innovation. It's a calculated gamble. Because it puts the burden of proof entirely on the FIA. The regulators would need to show that the floor's behavior violates Article 3.15, the clause about movable aerodynamic devices. But unless they can demonstrate intent, Red Bull can claim it's just structural compliance. A natural effect of materials. Nothing more. And if you think this sounds familiar, it should. It's the same argument that Ferrari used in 2019 with their fuel flow trick. The same ambiguity Mercedes leaned on during the DAS saga. This isn't about proving something works. It's about making it impossible to prove that it shouldn't. And right now, Red Bull is walking that line with absolute precision. The real concern for the FIA isn't whether Red Bull's floor is clever. It's that they didn't catch it sooner. Because if this design really is exploiting a material response that bypasses the current deflection tests, then Red Bull has built a loophole the FIA never anticipated. Not because they weren't watching, but because they didn't know where to look. And that brings back memories the FIA would rather forget. In 2019, Ferrari ran half a season with a fuel flow system that technically didn't violate the letter of the law, but absolutely violated its spirit. It wasn't until rival teams demanded clarification that the FIA stepped in. And even then, the final report never went public. Only a quiet settlement behind closed doors. That precedent haunts them. Because once a team unlocks a gray zone that gives a measurable performance advantage, it forces everyone else to react, not through innovation, but through imitation. And if the FIA waits too long, by the time they act, the season has already been shaped. Regulations become politics. And politics always come with backlash. Right now, it's not about whether Red Bull is breaking the rules. It's about whether they've exposed a weakness in the rulebook itself. And that kind of exposure doesn't go away with a directive. It creates instability, and in F1, instability spreads faster than any floor flex ever could. If the FIA confirms the floor trick violates Article 3.15, even subtly, the consequences won't just affect Red Bull. They'll trigger a chain reaction across the entire grid. Because whether it's banned tomorrow or clarified in a technical directive next week, every team will be forced to respond. And not with speculation, with redesigns. Underbody geometry. Material composition. Even suspension setups calibrated to the floor's stiffness. All of it becomes unstable the moment the FIA draws a new line. For Red Bull, that's not just an inconvenience, it's a development delay. If their floor is deemed non-compliant, they'll have to rework a key aerodynamic zone under immense time pressure. Not because they cheated, but because the boundary they were playing against just moved. For teams like Mercedes and Ferrari, this becomes a rare window. If Red Bull is forced into a compromise, it could narrow the performance gap, even briefly. And in a compressed calendar where early season points matter more than ever, a few tenths lost on corner entry could decide the championship path. But there's a risk for the FIA, too. If they act too aggressively, or too late, they could create a political mess. Red Bull will argue the floor passed all existing tests. They'll demand transparency on why the rules changed after the fact. And rival teams will either protest more loudly, or exploit the same ambiguity with their own designs. This isn't just about legality. It's about precedent. And in F1, precedent is as valuable and dangerous as performance itself. What we saw today, or rather, what the FIA suspects it saw, may only be the beginning. Because if Red Bull really has built a floor that flexes just outside the current testing parameters, they've exposed something much bigger than a technical loophole. They've revealed how fragile the 2026 regulations still are. This is the year everything was meant to reset. New power units. New sustainability targets. Cleaner, simpler aero. But if the most dominant team on the grid is already finding edges, then how many others are about to follow? And here's the uncomfortable part. What if this floor wasn't meant to survive the whole season? What if it was always intended as a one-shot gamble, something Red Bull would push in early testing, force the FIA to react, and then pivot once the damage was done? That's not just smart engineering. That's regulatory warfare. Because every time a team exploits a blind spot and gets the FIA to rewrite the rules, they're not losing. They're controlling the conversation. And if this is how Red Bull starts 2026, then we haven't seen the real trick yet. The real trick might be what comes after the ban.